The chief executive announced relaxation of property market cooling measures in his policy address. New policies to encourage local residents to have more children. And the CE vows to complete Article 23 legislation next year and roll out patriotic education in the city. Good evening and welcome to TVB News. Chief Executive John Lee today delivered his second policy address with the theme A Vibrant Economy for a Caring Community. New policies include a major adjustment to the city's property market cooling measures, the lowering of the stamp duty on stock transfer, and the building of more public housing units. To encourage childbirth, the government is giving parents each newborn baby a $20,000 handout. The CE also looks set to further strengthen the city's national security and patriotic education. Jacqueline begins our coverage.
In Chief Executive John Lee's second blueprint for the city, one major move is the relaxation of stabilizing measures for Hong Kong's property market, policies that have been in place for more than a decade.
The government has to come to a decision after making an assessment of the situation of Hong Kong, which includes not just locally, but also internationally, because property market is highly affected by interest rate and also by sentiment. It's time to relax some measures.
They include easing a stamp duty that aims to curb short-term speculation activities. This special stamp duty, equivalent to 10% of the home price, was levied if the owner resold the property within 3 years of purchase. Now it will be waived if the property is resold within 2 years. Halved rates too for both non-permanent residents buyer's stamp duty and levies on additional properties bought by locals. Both are slashed from 15% to 7.5%. The government will no longer require eligible overseas talent to pay stamp duty upfront on their newly bought property, and they will then be charged the levy only if they fail to become permanent residents. It's understood if the home buyers still do not get their permanent residency in Hong Kong after 7 years, authorities will offer an extra 2 years of buffer. After the deadline, they have to pay the stamp duty within 30 days. Efforts too on boosting land supply. In the next 10 years, the supply of spade-ready sites is expected to reach 3,370 hectares. 1,400 hectares will come from the Northern Metropolis project. The government targets to iron out details of the development plans and all land uses in the mega project next year. 40% of the apartments at the Northern Metropolis to be built by 2032. Another centerpiece of development, the Kao Yi Chau Artificial Islands, is set to offer 400 hectares of land over the next 10 years. Environmental impact assessments will kick off this year. The MTR Corporation will also be invited to study the development of lands around Hung Hom Station alongside the government. They encompass the 10 hectares of land south of the Hong Kong Coliseum and the areas near the harbourfront and pier. To increase incentives for developers to redevelop old districts, the CE proposed to ease the plot ratios at designated areas in Yau Ma Tei and Mong Kok and remove the plot ratio restriction in commercial areas near Nathan Road. The CE also said there's no major development plans to build public housing on the city's greenbelt areas following a previous feasibility study. Authorities instead will look into the possibility to use some of these protected areas for leisure and tourism purposes. The Development Bureau will conduct public consultation work in the first half of next year. Jacqueline, TVB News.
The latest policy address also rolled out several policies encouraging residents to have more children. They include a one-time $20,000 cash reward for every newborn child, as well as giving families with newborns priority in public housing. Timothy Lee tells us more.
Hong Kong's fertility rate ranks among the lowest in the world, dropping to a record low of 0.9 per couple, a rate similar to those of South Korea and Singapore. In a bid to incentivize residents to have more children, boosting the city's fertility rate became one of the highlights of the latest policy address. Chief Executive John Lee stressed with the number of births being in a long-term decline, the government must take urgent action before the trend becomes irreversible. Under the new measures, parents who are permanent residents of Hong Kong, including those who are not married, could receive a $20,000 monetary reward for every new child they have. The policy will last for 3 years. Sources say the amount was doubled from the original planned $10,000 to maximize the measure's effectiveness. Around $2.4 billion will be allocated to the scheme. Families with newborns will also have to wait one less year for public housing starting next April. Do residents think it is a good idea?
Yeah, most definitely, because I think one of the most concerning thing about having children here in Hong Kong, firstly, is the housing problem. So having some, economic subsidies definitely help in this case.
I think it's a nice bonus, good help. But then there's so much more into producing a new human being into the world. Not putting much pressure on women, be more considerate. It changes a lot when it comes to women giving birth.
I think I would want to have a big family anyway, so it wouldn't really affect on my choice. But yeah, if I knew that I would have some kind of cash, I wouldn't be sad about it.
Many residents said while they appreciate the $20,000 in cash, raising a child in the SAR requires much more than a one-time monetary reward. Some residents know that the government could alleviate the work pressure on women to boost the fertility rate. Timothy Lee, TVB News.
The chief executive also talked about national security and patriotic education in his speech today. John Lee said legislation under Article 23 of the Basic Law will be completed in 2024. The government will roll out patriotic education to enhance national identity and set up a new museum to showcase China's achievements.
Speaking on the issue of national security and Article 23 of the Basic Law, John Lee said the government is drawing up effective legislative options and will complete the legislative exercise in 2024. Starting next year, the mainland will implement the patriotic education law. Lee said Hong Kong will also roll out patriotic education.
To enhance national identity and appreciation of the richness and beauty of the traditional Chinese culture amongst the people of Hong Kong, laying a good foundation for our national unity and solidarity. We will also integrate patriotic education into our education system.
Authorities will organize mainland study tours for school teachers. The Education Bureau will also inspect at least 50 schools each year on the implementation of national education. A humanities curriculum framework for primary schools will be published, which will be implemented starting from the 2025-26 school year. An exhibition gallery that offers teaching materials and training for district-based tutors will be set up. Training for all civil servants will also be enhanced to nurture their patriotism and sense of national security. A Chinese Culture Promotion Office will be established and the Chinese Culture Festival will be organized starting next year. The government will also set up a museum to showcase the development and achievements of China. To address the increasing risks of cyber attacks globally, authorities will enhance the cybersecurity of critical infrastructure, including energy, telecommunications, transportation, and financial institutions. The government plans to introduce a bill in the Legislative Council for that purpose next year.
John Lee also announced that the administration has identified sufficient land to build 410,000 public housing units. Public housing output over the next 5 years will be increased to about 172,000 units, about 9% higher than the previous 5-year period. The measures are expected to shorten the average waiting time for public housing from 5.3 years to 4.5 years. The CE also proposed setting up a task force on tackling the issue of subdivided units to be led by Deputy Financial Secretary Michael Wong. It will set a minimum standard for subdivided units in terms of living environment and eradicate subdivided units that do not meet requirements. The task force is expected to submit a report to the CE within 10 months. John Lee also introduced measures to stimulate the economy. In order to boost the stock market, the stamp duty on stock transfer will be reduced from the current 0.13% to 0.1%. The chief executive said the city will develop headquarters economy to attract enterprises from outside Hong Kong to set up headquarters or corporate divisions in the city. The government will continue to attract enterprises, particularly key enterprises in advanced technology, innovation and strategic industries. The government will also implement the Capital Investment Entrant Scheme. Eligible investors who make investments of $30 million or above in assets such as stocks, funds, bonds, excluding real estate, can apply for entry into Hong Kong. To improve the city's transport network in a sustainable way, the CE proposed adopting a smart and green mass transit system. He said references could be taken from the mainland's Sky Shuttle systems. New plans too on the extension of the East Kowloon line from Po Tat to Na Yau Tong and Yau Tong. Another proposal is connecting Kai Tak MTR station to the Kai Tak runway area. For the Northern Metropolis, the government aims to expedite projects to extend the Northern Link rail project from Kutung Station to Lowu South and Man Kam To, an extension from Fanling Station 2 to Queen's Hill and Hung Yun Wai. Still ahead on tonight's news, the Shenzhou 17 mission cruise set to be launched tomorrow morning. And the widow of the construction worker killed in a crane collapse last year dies of cancer. Welcome back to TVB News. Israel escalated airstrikes across the Gaza Strip, killing more than 700 Palestinians, the highest daily Gaza death toll since fighting erupted. Palestinian officials say almost 6,000 people have died in the past 18 days, more than 2,000 of them children. Gaza's 2.3 million people have been running out of food, water and medicine since Israel sealed off the territory in the wake of Hamas' October 7th attack on Israeli towns. Diplomatic efforts are underway to delay an expected Israeli ground assault and allow in more aid trucks.
A wounded Palestinian is stretchered onto an ambulance. Dozens of helpers desperately search for more survivors after Israel destroyed a 4-story building in the southern Gaza region of Khan Yunis. Gaza officials say at least 32 people were killed, including 13 from the same family. Around 100 people were in the building, many of whom were evacuated from northern Gaza because they were told it would be safe in the south. The Gaza Health Ministry said 704 Palestinians were killed on Tuesday, the highest death toll in a single day since Israel launched bombing raids on October 7th. More than 300 of them were children. The Israel military said it conducted 400 airstrikes on Gaza on Tuesday, killing Hamas commandos and bombing a tunnel shaft. Israel also struck the occupied West Bank, killing 3 people after hitting the Jenin refugee camp, saying their forces came under fire from a group of Palestinians. Despite some aid trucks trickling into Gaza from Egypt through the Rafah border crossing, Israel is refusing to allow fuel into the area. The United Nations Relief Agency for Palestine, UNRWA, said it would halt operations tonight owing to a lack of fuel. US President Joe Biden said he had spoken to Saudi Arabian Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, with both agreeing on broader diplomacy to maintain stability across the region and prevent the conflict from expanding.
The United States and Russia put forward rival plans for humanitarian aid for Palestinian civilians at the United Nations as the Israel-Hamas war rages on. Meanwhile, French President Emmanuel Macron continued his bid to help calm tension in the Middle East as he traveled to Jordan for talks with the country's king. Dan Orell tells us more.
The United Nations Security Council gathered once again to discuss the ongoing Israel-Hamas conflict. Secretary-General Antonio Guterres told the Council that both sides should respect their obligations under international humanitarian law. Still, the UN's bid to draft a Security Council resolution remains in a stalemate. Washington has called for pauses in the fighting, arguing this would allow the delivery of humanitarian aid while still permitting Israel to conduct military operations to defend itself. A pause is generally considered less formal and shorter than a ceasefire. This as US Secretary of State Antony Blinken told the Council he'll work with China's top diplomat Wang Yi to prevent the conflict in the Middle East from spreading when they meet later this week. Russia and Arab states firmly backed the implementation of a humanitarian ceasefire amid widespread destruction in Gaza. A Council resolution needs at least 9 votes and no vetoes by the United States, France, Britain, Russia or China to be adopted. Elsewhere, French President Emmanuel Macron has travelled to Jordan and is meeting the country's King Abdullah II today. During his diplomatic tour of the Middle East, Macron has proposed that an international coalition fighting Islamic State in Iraq and Syria could widen its scope to include the fight against Hamas. Dan Orell, TVB News.
In the U.S., attorney and prominent conservative media figure Jenna Ellis has pleaded guilty to a felony charge over efforts to overturn Donald Trump's 2020 election loss in Georgia. Ellis tearfully told the judge Tuesday she looks back on that time with deep remorse. More from NBC News.
For weeks, attorney Jenna Ellis fiercely defended then-President Trump as he falsely claimed the 2020 election was rigged. Today, she sobbed as she told a judge she was wrong.
If I knew then what I know now, I would have declined to represent Donald Trump in these post-election challenges.
Ellis in a Georgia courtroom pleading guilty to a felony for helping fuel lies about thousands of dead people casting votes in 2020.
I failed to do my due diligence.
Smiling for her mugshot just 2 months ago, now the fourth co-defendant to flip in Fulton County's sprawling election interference case against the former president and more than a dozen others. Mr. Trump has pleaded not guilty, arguing he's being targeted by Democratic prosecutors because he's the Republican frontrunner. He was back in a Manhattan courtroom today, facing the state's star witness, his former fixer turned foe, Michael Cohen.
This is about accountability, plain and simple.
Raise your right hand.
It was Cohen's congressional testimony that jump-started the New York case, where his former boss now stands to lose his namesake company, accused of exaggerating the value of his assets to receive better loan terms in a $250 million civil fraud suit.
It was my experience that Mr. Trump inflated his total assets when it served his purposes.
Today, Cohen said he was tasked by the former president with boosting Mr. Trump's total assets to achieve a number he arbitrarily elected. While Mr. Trump's legal team has argued real estate values are subjective. Outside of court, Mr. Trump took aim at Cohen's credibility, pointing to Cohen's guilty plea for tax fraud and lying to Congress.
He's a proven liar, as you know, a felon, so he's a liar trying to get a better deal for himself, but it's not going to work. We did nothing wrong, and that's been proven.
In the U.S., an off-duty airline pilot who tried to cut the engines of a plane mid-flight told police he had recently taken psychedelic mushrooms amid mental health problems. On Tuesday, state prosecutors in Oregon filed 83 counts of attempted murder against 44-year-old Alaska Airlines pilot Joseph David Emerson. His attorney has entered not guilty pleas on his behalf. Emerson told police he had been struggling with depression and that he had taken psychedelic mushrooms about 48 hours before he attempted to cut the engines. He was arrested on Sunday night after the flight crew reported that he attempted to shut down the engines on a Horizon Air flight from Everett, Washington to San Francisco while riding in the extra seat in the cockpit. The plane was diverted to Portland. The Shenzhou 17 spacecraft is set to be launched at 11:14 a.m. tomorrow. The 3 crew members to work on board the Tiangong space station have the youngest average age since the construction of the orbiting station. The crew includes 48-year-old Tang Hongbo as commander, who took part in the Shenzhou 12 mission and was one of the first taikonauts to arrive at the space station. The other 2 members are 33-year-old Tang Shengjie, the youngest of the team and previously a pilot in the People's Liberation Army Air Force, and 35-year-old former tank driver Jiang Xin-lin. For Tang and Jiang, the Shenzhou 17 mission will be their first time in space. Locally, the widow of a construction worker who was killed in last year's crane collapse at an Anderson Road housing site succumbed to cancer last week. The couple left behind 2 young daughters, aged 5 and 8 respectively. A workers' concern group says family members of the girls initially declined donations, but they have now changed their minds.
The Association for the Rights of Industrial Accident Victims said the late construction worker's wife, Mrs. Ho, had been battling terminal breast cancer and passed away last Wednesday. Her funeral will be held next month. The couple's 2 young daughters are being taken care of by their grandfather. Fei Xiu, chief executive of the association, said she had spoken to the girl's guardian. As the bank account of the girl's mother has been frozen after her death and the fact that the kids need money to support their daily expenses and education, the guardian says they are now willing to accept help from the public.
In September last year, a tower crane collapsed at a construction site on Anderson Road in East Kowloon, leaving 3 people dead and 6 others injured. Authorities later brought 67 prosecutions against the main contractor, Aggressive Construction Engineering. And that's the news. Thanks for watching.